Welcome to the 5-Minute Biographies podcast from 5minutebiographies.com, where each week we tell you interesting things about interesting people in about 5 minutes. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, why not consider buying us a coffee? Head on over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how. This is the 10th and final episode of Season 21. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie's life reads like the blueprint of the American dream. Rising from a Scottish weaver's cottage to become one of the wealthiest men in history, he embodied both the triumphs and contradictions of industrial capitalism. His name became synonymous with steel, philanthropy, and the idea that wealth carried moral responsibility. Andrew Carnegie was born on the 25th of November, 1835, in Dunfermline, Scotland, a small industrial town whose hum of looms and smell of coal smoke would leave a lasting impression. His father, William Carnegie, was a handloom weaver, and his mother, Margaret, kept the household afloat by mending shoes and selling food to neighbours. The family lived modestly but proudly, bound by the ideals of hard work, education, and self-improvement. When mechanised looms began to replace traditional weavers, the Carnegies found themselves in financial hardship. Seeking a better life, they emigrated to the United States in 1848, settling in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. Andrew was just 12. The journey across the Atlantic was long and miserable, but he later recalled the moment he first saw the lights of New York as the beginning of everything. In America, young Carnegie found work in a cotton factory, earning barely $1.20 a week. The work was exhausting and dangerous, yet he studied by candlelight after long shifts, driven by a hunger for learning that would never fade. He later moved to a job as a telegraph messenger, where his quick mind and photographic memory made him invaluable. By listening to the clicking of the telegraph, he taught himself to decipher messages by sound, an early sign of the resourcefulness that would define his career. His next opportunity came at the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, where he was hired as a secretary to Thomas A. Scott, a man who recognized Carnegie's talent and ambition. Under Scott's mentorship, Carnegie learned how business, technology, and investment intertwined. He also learned to seize opportunity, purchasing his first shares in the Adams Express Company, which transported packages along the railway. By his early 20s, he was earning far more than most men twice his age. The boy who once swept factory floors was now riding the rails of America's industrial expansion. The American Civil War transformed Carnegie's prospects. Tasked with organizing telegraph lines for the Union, he discovered how to manage large-scale logistics and people under pressure. After the war, he turned his attention to iron bridges and railway materials, recognizing the growing demand for durable infrastructure. By the 1870s, he had founded the Carnegie Steel Company, based in Pittsburgh. There, he applied both ruthless efficiency and technical innovation. His factories embraced the Bessemer process, a new method for producing steel quickly and cheaply, which allowed him to undercut competitors and dominate the market. Carnegie's genius lay not only in recognizing new technology, but in mastering organization. He surrounded himself with capable men such as Henry Clay Frick and Charles Schwab, delegated responsibility with precision, and demanded results. His factories ran around the clock, and his costs remained lower than anyone else's. By the 1890s, Carnegie Steel had become the largest and most profitable industrial enterprise in the world. The company's annual output exceeded that of the entire British Empire's steel industry, and its profits made Carnegie one of the wealthiest men alive. Despite his fortune, Carnegie remained haunted by his humble origins and the lessons of his mother's thrift. In 1889, he published an essay that would define his philosophy, The Gospel of Wealth. In it, he argued that the rich had a moral obligation to use their fortunes for the good of society. The man who dies rich dies disgraced, he wrote, challenging his fellow industrialists to follow his example. Carnegie believed that wealth should not be handed out as charity, but invested in projects that empowered people, libraries, schools, and cultural institutions that would enable self-improvement. His philosophy was both visionary and self-serving. It offered moral justification for great inequality, while insisting on personal responsibility for social betterment. He began to put his words into action almost immediately. By the early 1900s, Carnegie had sold his steel empire to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, roughly $15 billion today, and devoted the rest of his life to giving it away. Carnegie's philanthropy was immense and meticulously organized. He established over 2,500 public libraries across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and beyond, believing that access to knowledge could lift anyone out of poverty, just as it had lifted him. He endowed universities, built concert halls, and funded scientific research. The Carnegie Institution for Science, Carnegie Mellon University, and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace all trace their origins to his generosity. He also funded pensions for teachers and established the Carnegie Hero Fund to recognize acts of civilian bravery. In total, he gave away more than 90% of his fortune before his death, over $350 million, equivalent to many billions today. Yet his philanthropy was not without controversy. Critics accused him of hypocrisy, pointing to his earlier business practices and the harsh conditions in his steel mills. The Homestead Strike of 1892, in which several workers were killed during a violent labor dispute, left a permanent stain on his reputation. Carnegie, who was abroad during the strike, later expressed regret that such brutality had occurred in his company's name. The episode revealed the deep contradictions of his life, a man who preached benevolence, yet built his fortune on the sweat and suffering of industrial laborers. Carnegie married relatively late in life. In 1887, at the age of 51, he wed Louise Whitfield, a woman 20 years his junior who shared his quiet dignity and philanthropy. They had one daughter, Margaret, who became the center of his domestic world. He was known for his charm and generosity in private life, but also for an ego as large as his fortune. He enjoyed conversation, literature, and music, and counted among his friends figures such as Mark Twain, Theodore Roosevelt, and William Gladstone. He was also an advocate for world peace, funding efforts to prevent conflict in the years leading up to the First World War. Despite his wealth, he lived relatively simply. His home, Skibo Castle in Scotland, was grand but not ostentatious, reflecting his attachment to his roots. In correspondence, he often reflected on the contrast between his childhood poverty and his later riches, concluding that fortune was meaningless unless used to improve the world. Carnegie spent his final years largely retired from public life, dividing his time between Scotland and New York. The outbreak of the First World War deeply troubled him. He had long believed that international cooperation could make war obsolete, and the conflict shattered that ideal. His health declined rapidly in his later years, and he died on the 11th of August 1919 at his summer home in Lenox, Massachusetts, aged 83. At the time of his death, he had given away more money than any man in history, leaving only a modest sum for his family and his charitable foundations. His will instructed that the remaining funds continue to promote education, peace, and scientific discovery. Historians remain divided on Andrew Carnegie's legacy. To some, he was the quintessential self-made man, an immigrant who built an empire and then spent his life trying to give back. To others, he symbolized the moral contradictions of the Gilded Age, a man whose philanthropy sought to cleanse the inequities created by his own success. His steel empire helped build modern America. Its railways, bridges, and skyscrapers all bore his mark. Yet the cost of that progress was often paid by those who labored in dangerous, exhausting conditions. The Homestead Strike stands as a reminder that progress and exploitation frequently walk hand in hand. Nevertheless, Carnegie's commitment to public learning reshaped entire communities. Towns across Britain and America still boast libraries bearing his name, quiet temples of self-education, built on his belief that knowledge was the truest form of charity. Andrew Carnegie's life is a paradox of brilliance and contradiction. He proved that ambition could lift a man from poverty to power, yet also that wealth, left unchecked, demanded moral reckoning. His story mirrors the transformation of the 19th century itself, from handlooms to steel mills, from local craftsmanship to global industry. When he said, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced," he meant it, and he lived by those words. Though history continues to debate the cost of his success, few can deny the magnitude of his generosity or the depth of his influence. In the end, Andrew Carnegie forged more than steel. He forged an idea that prosperity should serve a purpose beyond profit, and that the greatest legacy of all is the betterment of others. Thanks for listening to the 5-Minute Biographies podcast from 5minutebiographies.com. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, or if you would like to support us more directly, why not consider buying us a coffee? Head on over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how. Also, why not check out our other 5-minute podcasts, which you can find at 5minuteproductions.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.